Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, it's time for an important update on roads and bridges. It's springtime. Are we going to see a lot more construction than we've seen over the winter? But first, how about this? Let's go to big stories of the week. Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, again, welcome to the program. We're excited this week about our show. We think it's going to be exciting. Joining me, as often is the case, is John Micek. He's the editorial page editor of Pennsylvania Capital Star. In a minute, I want him to explain what that is for you. And, of course, Marc Levy, he's with the Associated Press. John, you got 15 seconds. Pennsylvania Capital Star.
Yes.
You used to be with the Patriot News Penn Live.
Yeah, I'm the editor of the Pennsylvania Capital Star, a brand new, all digital, all politics and policy Pennsylvania News website. We debuted February 5th, Budget Day. Great team of reporters. We're covering state
Fabulous.
capital and our congressional delegation top to toe.
Fab. All right, I'm going to start with you, Marc. It looks like Pennsylvania, see if Pennsylvania matters in the presidential primary next year. Typically we don't. We're way ahead. Next year, April is when the primary is. But the candidates are at least one big one in this state. Joe Biden is running all over Pennsylvania. Of course, he only lives, about 20 miles from the Pennsylvania border down there in Wilmington. So what's going on? Will we matter?
Yeah, so there's reason to believe that Pennsylvania's relatively late Democratic primary next year may actually help decide a winner. There's several factors. One of them is the big field of candidates right now, and we saw the first substantial rally by Beto O'Rourke a couple weeks ago at Penn State. We've seen some candidates come in for fundraisers in Philadelphia. I think the party has an interest in party committee members trying to stay neutral so that they don't sway votes.
Let me just stop you here for a minute. Beto O'Rourke was a three-term member of Congress from Texas. He came very close to upsetting Ted Cruz. He raised something like $80 million. Am I right about that? Mm-hmm. I mean, and he's caught the fancy of a lot of
Yeah, so he's giving Bernie Sanders a run for his money with sort of the liberal base and the small money donors that helped fuel Bernie Sanders' run in 2016.
Will we matter?
I think so. Look, I mean, this is a state that Donald Trump dearly wants to hold on to. He flipped Pennsylvania for the first time in nearly 30 years in 2016, winning by 44,000 votes. When you go to Trump campaign rallies, he waxes rhapsodic every single time about his win in Pennsylvania and how much that meant to him. Conversely, Democrats want to take the state back. They had encouraging wins in the midterms last November. They think they can keep that momentum going. The question is whether they will.
Yep. Well, the Rust Belt strategy that President Trump used, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, proved decisive in the election. So I think you guys are on to something.
And, I mean, Terry, we're seeing independent expenditure money coming in as well already. The two big Democratic PACs, American Bridge and Priorities USA, coming in and spending millions and millions of dollars. This early. A particular constituency as well, trying to flip the Trump triers who crossed over in 2016 and then trying to win them back.
All right, I want to bring up something that, created something of a stir and a controversy. John, I'll start with you on this. It's commonly referred to as the invocation controversy. Tell our viewers about that.
So, typically the House begins its voting session with an invocation by a member. That's, by the way, is specifically in response to a federal lawsuit where they were ordered by a judge to allow non-believers and humanists and that kind of thing to give an invocation. So they got around that by simply allowing members to. So a first-term Republican member from Clinton County named Stephanie Borowitz, avowedly conservative, opposes abortion rights, favors the Second Amendment, that kind of thing, got up on Monday afternoon and gave a very explicitly religious and overtly political prayer where she threw shout-outs to Israel and to President Donald Trump. What matters about that, Terry, is that was the day that Representative Movita Johnson-Harrell, the legislature's first black Muslim woman, was being sworn into office. Obviously, there is some issues there with President Trump in Israel if you're a member of the Muslim faith. Representative Johnson-Harrell thought the prayer was Islamophobic. It took off on social media. Minority Leader Frank Dermody actually got up, issued a very rare rebuke. House Speaker Mike Turzai got up and had to remind members that when they give invocations, they're supposed to be ecumenical.
So the point is, the reaction to it was bipartisan. Am I right about that?
You know,
or John right, he made the point.
Yeah, I mean, they reacted in different ways. So Republicans understood that this was beyond the norm. This was overtly religious to the exclusion of other religions. It's not unusual for an invocation to talk about God in the general sense.
Sure.
But it's generally not an exclusionary type of an invocation, which this was. And so the Democrats were much more exercised about it, feeling that it was very targeted, that it was very bigoted. Republicans did not use that type of tone, but they did understand that this was beyond the norm.
All right, a couple of days ago we had the 40th anniversary of the 3 Mile Island nuclear meltdown. We're going to run to a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about efforts in the Pennsylvania legislature with a $500 million, it's been called subsidy appropriation, I'll let you guys thrash that out, to bail out 3 Mile Island, which is scheduled to close if they don't get relief on September 30, and they're probably going to lose their certification, their classification, their ability to commission, I guess, to literally produce nuclear energy. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, I'm chatting with Marc Levy and John Micek, two experienced reporters who have covered much of the state's politics and government for a number of years. All right, let me go to you. Marc. $500 million in subsidy we have 5 nuclear power plants in this state. There are 8 reactors that produce electricity. About 40% of the electricity is produced. It's carbon free. So, that's another part of the debate. Is the legislature, $500 million, going to bail out TMI and perhaps one other nuclear power plant?
It remains to be seen. It's complicated legislation, and there are probably very few lawmakers who are willing to just cast a vote to bail out all the nuclear power plants. Bailout is a word that the nuclear power plant backers don't like to use, but the fact of the matter is if this is going to pass, it seems like it's going to have to take on some elements that advance the goals of renewable energy, like wind and solar.
Yeah.
Labor union-friendly lawmakers are going to want to see guarantees that these plants stay open. The governor's
union
office,
jobs are there. Yeah.
The governor's office has indicated that it's going to want to see financial transparency from these companies to the extent that shows which plants are actually in financial trouble, if not other than 3 Mile Island. So it's got a long ways to go. The natural gas industry is influential in the building, and they oppose it. So the question is there something out there that would bring them on board?
It's complicated.
Absolutely. I mean, you could see the natural gas industry, for instance, pressing for some kind of regulatory relief, money for pipeline infrastructure, which is something they've been pressing for quite a while. There's, as Marc correctly says, there's any number of competing constituencies here. And let's be clear about something. This would be on the backs of consumers.
Yeah.
So I mean that is radioactive for lawmakers on its face.
One of the things that given the climate change urgency and how important it has become, it's carbon free. Carbon free.
Oh, I don't disagree with you, but the question becomes:
I'm just raising the question.
Right, should customers though be forced to pick up the tab?
Yeah,
for bailing out this industry? And you are right though. The nuclear industry provides a large amount of electricity, but other renewable sources need to be part of it as well.
All right, one other, maybe hopefully we'll get to 2, but at least one other topic. Marijuana legalization. John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, is on this 67 county tour. In the poll that Franklin and Marshall College released this past week, 59% support legalization. By the way, that's the same as September of where am I? 2017, a couple of years ago. Legislature, it's pretty conservative. I'm using this descriptively, not pejoratively.
Well, and look, we've got 10 states out there that have legalized recreational marijuana, and 9 of them did it through voter referendum. Only 1 state had a legislature that signed off on it. And so, Pennsylvania has no direct access to the ballot for voter referendums. So,
but they could do it in advisory fact. They could put it on the ballot as advisory to the legislature, couldn't they?
I suppose they could. I mean, there's not a long history of that.
Right.
Yeah, but so I mean, just it's got to be viewed as a long shot in this state. But the governor, when he said it's time to take this seriously in the past couple months, he cited the fact that it was moving down the road in New York and New Jersey, 2 states on Pennsylvania's borders, and we're in the middle of John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, doing a statewide tour, sampling opinion. And he's a big supporter of legalization.
Well, I mean, State Senator Jim Brewster, you just talked about a second. We had an op-ed from him in the pages of the Capitol Star not too long ago, calling for exactly that, an advisory question on the ballot from voters to let them
looks like it would pass, given the polls.
Give a clear signal to where they stand. And this is again one of these issues, Terry, where the electorate has outpaced policymakers. We see this from time to time in same-sex marriage, in other sort of social questions. And there's a lot of there's a lot of money at stake. We're talking $500 million.
Well, the Auditor General has been on this program, Eugene DePasquale. He's going all over the state. It's a huge issue for him, isn't it?
But that is often how these are resolved. There may be reluctance, there may be reticence, but when you say, okay, well, $500 million and we got to close a hole.
All right, before I let you go, and we're going to have Bob Latham, who's the expert we bring in from the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. He's our expert on all things roads and bridges. But very quickly, we have about a minute left in this segment. I'll start with you. Can the Turnpike survive?
Should the Turnpike survive?
Well, that's another question. But go ahead. Will it survive?
I mean, look, Auditor General Eugene Pasquale was out last week saying the tolling agency was headed to bankruptcy as a result of a couple of disastrous policy decisions in the early aughts. It can be. It's just going to it'll just take some work.
Let me ask you this question: is this a big issue? Is this going to emerge as one of the fundamental issues that the legislature will try to deal with early on in this session?
It is shaping up that way for a couple reasons. One, there's a growing unhappiness with toll hikes every year on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. 2, transit agencies aren't getting their money that they were guaranteed from a 2013 law that raised gas taxes to create more money for transportation. And the reason is because the Turnpike is not transferring money to the state that it was told to do so under 2008 law. That's what's sort of driving up their debt. So they're hanging on to their money right now in the middle of a federal lawsuit against the constitutionality of these transfers.
All right, well, look, I want to thank both of you for coming on. As you know, you're always welcome. You'll come back, and we'll continue these discussion on some of these important issues. And now I want to turn to Mr. Latham. We'll bring him on. He's the expert that we bring on. He's with the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. We'll talk about the Turnpike. We'll talk about it's springtime. It doesn't feel that way always outside. But road and bridge construction, where are we with it? How much money is available and what's likely to happen? We'll do that, and we'll get back to the show after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
When we talk about the Turnpike and roads and bridges, our expert is Bob Latham. He's the Executive Vice President with the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. All right, Bob, you heard Marc and John talk about the debt of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and could it, is it sustainable? What's the future for the Turnpike? What's the cause of the debt?
Okay, so we've been doing this for several years, Terry, and when we passed the Comprehensive Transportation Funding Bill back in 2013, there was a portion of that bill which set up a system where toll revenue from the Turnpike would go to create bond financing, which would then go to PennDOT and then over to public transit. It's a little bit complicated, but the bottom line was that it required the tolls on the Turnpike to go up and up and up and up over a number of years. We always knew that that was not sustainable, was going to have to be replaced at some point. Right now, there's a lawsuit filed against that, a challenge by trucking organizations saying that this is a disruption of interstate commerce. So if that lawsuit is successful, this whole schematic that we have now will come.
So let me get this straight. So money that's raised by the Turnpike gets siphoned off for another purpose, basically.
Basically,
is that what you're saying?
That's the case.
So
yeah.
the Turnpike doesn't have the revenue it needs to operate it, to run its operations. Does that mean doing repairs on the road, doing the things that the Turnpike needs to do?
I think the Turnpike could probably use more revenue to do that. They've been able to sustain a fairly robust capital program, but the problem is, in order to keep this toll bond revenue for public transit going, their debt is now astronomical. It's, as Auditor General Di Pasquale noted in a report recently, it's, the old term, it's unsustainable. I'll call it a house of cards. It's going to crumble.
Quickly,
we have to find a new way to fund it.
Many other things I want to get to.
Sure.
What's the solution?
Well, the solution is we're going to have to find new ways to fund public transit. Basically, it's about $400 million a year that this scheme is being used to prop up public transit. They will need a mix of local and perhaps state sources.
All right, you and I, over the course of several years, have talked about roads and bridge repair and the importance. But here's something that the Federal Highway Administration came out with just recently. U.S. drivers pay about $60 billion a year in repairs and other increased vehicle operating costs. You got poor road conditions, you have accidents. PA drivers spend nearly $3 billion, or $341 per motorist. This was in caucus, LNP.
Well, of course, here's the situation. We did a lot of good things with the money we raised from Act 89. We had 6,000 bad bridges in the state. We've cut that inventory to 2. We've done a lot of safety improvement projects, a lot of easing congestion, a couple of major projects. We go back to the Turnpike. From the beginning of the interstate era, there was always this disconnect at I-95. It was the only missing link in the whole Eisenhower interstate program. That project finally got completed. We're doing a lot of work, but here's the thing. We don't have enough money to fix our interstates, and that's where the biggest problem is right now. And it's being exacerbated by, guess what? We're taking the gas tax money from what we call the motor license fund, sending it over to the general fund in order to pay for the operations of our state police. $9 billion over an 18-year period.
All right, I want to continue with this diversion of the money and what you see is, as we move forward this year in terms of the repairs on the roads and bridges and what kind of progress we're making, and we'll do that, then get back to you.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
I'm chatting with Bob Latham. We're talking about roads and bridges and the Turnpike and a whole bunch of important things. All right, the construction went on all during the winter. You couldn't drive 5 miles on any major road without seeing bridge and repair work done. But now we're getting into spring and summer when it's certainly... What progress has been made overall in this state, given the urgency of it several years ago when the funding was approved?
Well, again, when we pass a funding bill, we now have the highest gas tax in the country, and we are reaping some rewards from that. We ramped up our overall capital spending on roads by about $1 billion a year over what it would have been if we hadn't passed that bill. So we are seeing a lot of improvements. Big projects like Central Susquehanna Valley, up in the Shamokin area. I've mentioned I-95.
Right.
We've seen a lot of work out in Pittsburgh. I-70 is getting a lot of attention out there. So across the state, we are seeing a lot of progress. I mentioned our inventory of bad bridges, so we're fixing those. We're making things more safe. But we're still diverting a lot of money out of that to the general fund. I think it's a matter of we don't want to face up to the fact that we have to pay for general fund type things. So we're taking money out of the Turnpike and putting it over into public transit. We're taking money out of the motor license fund and putting it over into the general fund in order to fund the state police. These things need to change.
It's not that these aren't legitimate concerns. It's just that they're taking money that was originally appropriated for one thing and diverting it.
Correct. On the transit side, most major metropolitan areas fund public transit at the regional level, and I think that the transit agencies would support an opportunity, the availability to do that. The state police is usually funded out of the general fund. In other states, we're funding it out. It's competing with our road money in Pennsylvania. That needs to stop. And again, all these things are very important. They need to have their own funding source as opposed to kind of competing against. Nobody's arguing that whatsoever.
So
what we think we could do is if we could take the equivalent of a penny of the gas tax, which is about $65 million a year, if we were able to draw that back from the general fund, and managing $65 million in a $33 billion budget we think is doable. That would roll it back so that we would be able to do a lot more on our roads and bridges that we could now and fund some of these interstate projects.
So how much more needs to be done in terms of percentages? When we started, there was 100% of road and bridge repair that needs to be done. Are we halfway through the road and bridge repair work?
Well, again, the problem with Pennsylvania is we're continuously repairing our system. Our system,
good point.
Former Secretary Brad Maurer used to say we're old, cold, and wet, and that really plays havoc with our road system. So we're always doing the repairs. We need a lot of additional revenue. The other thing is we've seen nothing from the federal government on this. When we passed the comprehensive bill in 2013, we thought, okay, well, this will go about 2/3 of it. Congress will step up with the other third.
And
they've done nothing.
But hold on, there's a lot of conversation in Washington about doing it, about supporting. And it seems like it's bipartisan, but yet nothing happens to help the states out.
Everybody is in favor, and all the congressmen, it was like, I heard one quote saying, yeah, I'm all for infrastructure, but I don't want to raise any taxes. Well, again, we had an old state senator that said everybody wants to go to heaven, just nobody wants to die. So, I mean, we have to, the pay-fors are the big issue. One other thing I think is we don't assess electric cars for anything, for their use of the roads, and we need to start looking at that.
All right, look, as always, you'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll get another update, particularly when we get into the big season for road and bridge repair. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.